That night in November, up in northern Wisconsin, the snow was coming down so hard, I could barely see the edges of the road in front of my old Ford. I was heading home to Duluth after a long business trip, and I was so exhausted. I was struggling just to keep my eyes open. The heater was blasting, but the cold, it kept creeping in through those worn-out car doors. After driving for over 2 hours, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the back seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror quickly. I didn't see anything strange, but the child seat, the one I'd kept since my niece's visits in the summer, looked like it had shifted a few inches. I convinced myself that the car had just hit a patch of ice. Minutes later, a strange smell filled the car. It was a mix of damp earth and rotting meat. A wave of unease washed over me, so I pulled over to the side of the road to check things out. When I stepped out, the cold wind hit me like a wall. I shone my phone's flashlight around the car. Nothing. But then, I noticed fresh footprints in the snow near the trunk. The wind was already blurring them, but it looked like someone had been standing there just moments ago. I rushed back into the car and locked the doors. When I turned the key, the dashboard lights dimmed, then flickered back on. The battery was old, so I didn't think much of it. But what really chilled me was a soft, metallic click from the back, like someone had just moved something inside the trunk. I tried to ignore it and kept driving, and the feeling that I wasn't alone was growing. I kept checking the rearview mirror. At one point, I could have sworn something moved in the back seat, but when I turned around, nothing. Just the dancing shadows cast by the headlights of distant cars and the falling snow. About 10 minutes later, I heard a faint rustling. It sounded just like someone shifting their weight. A shiver raced down my spine. I turned off the radio, and silence filled the car. That's when I heard it again. This time, it was clearer. It was coming from the trunk. I pulled over immediately. I opened the door, stepped out with my phone light, and walked to the trunk. I was terrified to open it, but curiosity and fear pushed me. I lifted the latch. I didn't find a person or an animal, just an old metal toolbox that had slid around, banging against the sides with every turn. I let out a breath of relief for a moment. But that relief didn't last. Right on top of the toolbox, I found an old blanket. I didn't remember putting it there. It was damp, like someone had been using it. I stared at it for a few seconds before slamming the trunk shut and jumping back into the car. My fatigue was really messing with my head now, so I decided to stop at the first gas station I could find. About 20 minutes later, I pulled into an old station off Highway 2. The lights were on, but the parking lot was completely empty. I walked inside, shivering from the cold and the nerves. The place was uncomfortably quiet. I called out for the attendant, but no one answered. I wandered past the shelves until I reached the back office. There, I found a coffee cup, still warm. A landline phone was off the hook, and a chair was overturned on the floor. My stomach sank. It was clear. Someone had left in a hurry, very recently. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but the signal was dead. As I was trying to find a bar, I heard the front door of the station open slowly. I spun around. I didn't see anyone, but fresh, wet snow tracks were leading from the entrance into the store. My breathing got fast, shallow. Logic was gone. I started backing up until I hit the glass drink cooler. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the glass, there wasn't anyone standing behind me, but there was a man, a real man, standing between the aisles at the back of the store, watching me in silence. I hadn't heard him enter, I hadn't seen him. When I turned toward the door, he was just standing there. His clothes were soaked with snow, his face was pale, and his eyes were locked onto mine. Without a blink, I screamed at him, asked him who he was, but he didn't answer. Then, he started to walk toward me, slowly. I bolted for the door. I ran out into the blizzard, and I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, where a municipal snowplow spotted me and pulled over. The next morning, the police went back to the station with me. They found footprints, both inside and outside the building, but they never found anyone. One of the officers told me that the station had been broken into several times over the past few weeks by an unknown man who had been hiding in abandoned buildings during the storms. They didn't know if it was the same man I saw, but for me, I can't get one thing out of my head. And when the police opened my trunk to check it again, they found that old blanket, and it had fresh food scraps inside, and a water bottle, half empty. Someone had been inside my car at some point that night, and to this day, I don't know when they got in or when they got out. It was late September 2025. I was driving from Seattle heading towards Salt Lake City, taking I-84. The trip was supposed to be simple, but I decided to make a slight detour through Bend, Oregon, just to take in the scenery. By about 10 p.m., I noticed my fuel gauge dropping dangerously low. I started to panic, realizing I was running on fumes in the middle of nowhere. I had passed plenty of stations on the main road, but they are all closed, so my GPS forced me off the highway onto a back road, winding through empty, isolated farmland. 10 minutes later, I found it. An old rundown gas station. The lights were flickering, making this constant buzzing sound. I didn't see any staff outside, just an old guy, maybe in his 50s, wearing oil-stained work clothes, sitting inside a small booth. I filled up the tank, but when I tried to pay with my card, the machine wouldn't take it. I asked the old man, "How can I pay?" He just pointed coldly toward a back office and said he had to manually activate the pump from inside. I stepped into the office. The air, it smelled thick with cigarettes and burnt wood. But behind the desk, there wasn't just one man. There were three. They were sitting there in total silence. They didn't look at each other, and they didn't even turn to look at me when I walked in. I put my card on the table, but one of them, a massive guy with a built athletic frame, didn't even reach for it. Instead, he asked me in a low, heavy voice, "You're not from around here, are you? Your plates say Washington." I nodded, my voice stuttering. "No, sir." I noticed him scanning me with this unsettling, piercing look. He started asking me where I was headed and why I took this road. I just told him I got lost when my fuel ran low. And then I saw it under the table. 2 modern smartphones and a small backpack. It looked way too familiar. I stared at the bag and my heart dropped. It was the same backpack that my coworker, Irene, used to carry. She'd gone missing 2 months ago during a business trip in this very state. I tried to tell myself I was crazy. Maybe it was just a similar bag. Maybe I was just desperate to get out of there. And I was playing tricks on my own mind. That's what I told myself. I tried to keep my cool. I said I'd leave immediately and pay with cash. The big man moved so slowly. He stood up and blocked the path between me and the door. He said in a calm, suspicious tone, "It's getting pretty late, and the road ahead is closed for maintenance. It'd probably be better if you just wait here until morning." I didn't wait for him to finish. I threw some cash on the tables and bolted for the door. I felt his hand grab my shoulder, but I shoved the door open and scrambled into my car. I couldn't even turn the ignition on the first try. My hands were shaking, hysterically. And then I saw him emerge from the station, holding a high-powered flashlight. He started shouting names I'd never heard before, while the other two men came out slowly behind him. One of them, he was carrying something long and metal. I gunned it. I drove as fast as I could, and I didn't dare check the rearview mirror for 10 full minutes. But then, I saw headlights behind me, closing in at a terrifying speed. I whipped the wheel, almost slamming into the guardrail, and killed my lights completely. I hid in a narrow dirt side road, buried deep in the trees. They flew right past me. They didn't stop. I sat there in the dark for 2 hours. I was too scared to even breathe. Once I was sure they were gone, I got back on the highway. I didn't go to the police right away, but because I was terrified that maybe they were in on it. Or maybe I was just overreacting. A week later, I saw a local news report about an abandoned car found in that same area, and the driver was missing. I tried to contact the police to give my statement, but when I went to the station, they told me there was no record of any gas station at those coordinates. None. To this day, the feeling of that man's hand on my shoulder, it still haunts me. Every time I have to stop at an isolated station at night, I feel it. I don't know who they were. I don't know what happened to that bag, or if it was really Irene's. But I know one thing for sure, they had been watching that road for a long time, just waiting for some stranger who no one was coming to look for. I was working as a DoorDash driver late at night in the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan, specifically out in Romulus, near the airport. It's an area where the roads are pitch black and the houses are miles apart. It was almost 1 a.m. and it was raining. I accepted one last order before ending my shift. A big one. The customer didn't give a house number, just the street name. And in the notes they wrote, "Leave the order at the large wooden gate at the end of the road. Don't knock. Don't call. I'll be waiting." The address led me down a dirt path that stretched deep into a thick, dense forest. Google Maps eventually hit a dead end, right in front of a massive, rusty iron gate. Behind it sat a rotting wooden one. On the ground, there was an old sign, written in shaky, handwritten ink. "No trespassing. Private property." There was no light, not a single sign of life. I stepped out of the car, and the silence was so heavy, I could hear the echo of every raindrop hitting the leaves. I set the bags down by the wooden gate, and as I turned to head back to my car, I heard a sound from right behind the gate. The sound of solid metal, scraping against concrete, then a whisper, so faint it sounded like it was coming from beneath the earth. "Put it in the box." Inside, I squinted and saw an old wooden chest, looked like a military ammo crate. half buried in the dirt near the gate. It was shut with a strange rusted lock, the kind I'd never seen before. A cold fear washed over me. I decided I'd just leave the bags on the ground and get out of there. I jumped into my car and tried to start it, but the engine just clicked and died. I tried again, and a third time. Nothing. My Honda was old, but it had never let me down. That's when I looked into the rearview mirror. I saw a tiny light, like a dim flashlight, moving slowly through the trees, toward the gate. It didn't move in a straight line. It was swaying, with this terrifying, erratic rhythm. I panicked. I started hitting the steering wheel, screaming at the car to start. Suddenly, the light vanished. Total darkness. And then, I heard the click of the wooden chest opening. Click. The lid creaked open. Slow, like something heavy was crawling out. But the sound didn't come from the gate. It came from the right side of my car. It sounded like it was whispering right through my tinted rear window. I didn't dare turn my head. I stared straight ahead, shaking, as a sickening smell, like rotting meat, started seeping into the car. And then I heard it, a tapping on my window. Very light, like long, sharp fingernails, followed by the sound of heavy, freezing breath. Finally, after a desperate, frantic struggle, the engine roared to life. I floored it, speeding down that rough dirt road without once looking back. I nearly crashed into trees on the way out. I didn't report it to the company. I was just too terrified to think straight. The next morning at Babuaba, I decided to check the address on the maps again. I found out that the dead-end road I had been on hadn't existed in official records since 1990. It had been closed off after a mysterious case where an entire family vanished from a house that used to stand behind those gates. But it gets worse. When I took my car to the shop, the mechanic found something wedged in my rear tire. It was a splinter from that old rotting wooden chest, wrapped in a piece of cloth, stained with dried blood, and written on it, in a shaky, familiar hand, "This wasn't your last order." Even now, every time I look in the rearview mirror at night, while driving on empty roads, I see a faint shadow standing in the dark. It points at me, with long, thin fingers, and I hear those soft, rhythmic taps against the glass. And I don't know how to wake up from this nightmare.